us where are we at with the late president 4 months on without burial?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thanks for having me on your program. I had explained earlier to say that the update is as it was, with a little progress that has been made from the time that we last gave the update. And largely, this has been because of the clandestine activities that the state had been carrying out in the background, whilst we thought we were carrying out genuine talks with them. The idea was to try and build, because what had been broken down right from the beginning was trust, and that the family was not able to trust the government. That trust to be rebuilt needed the government to show that they were genuine in their approach to the discussions that were ongoing. From the time the government took the family to court, we had been engaging in discussions. We had been telling the government to say it's important that we discuss this matter, we come to a conclusion, and we agree on what necessarily has to be done as to what amounts to a dignified send-off. The definition is not necessarily that which the government thinks is the case, but the wishes of the family, the wishes of the deceased ought to be taken into account. And that is what was hoped to be achieved, and that is what is still being hoped to be achieved. But we have seen that there have been these clandestine moves, all aimed at access to the body. You may be aware that right from the start, the president did say that he was aware that the President Edgar Chagwa died even before Tarsila announced that he had died. And now you have all this propaganda machinery of the government and of the UPND coming in and saying, no, President Lungu is not dead. President Lungu was poisoned. President Lungu bought 150 vehicles in Johannesburg. He bought a house. President Lungu was a drug dealer. You have all these issues that are being propagated by the machinery that belongs to the ruling party. And the family, in most cases, has sat back and done little about that. We, on several occasions, that all things be stopped. At some point, we saw that they managed to prevail over outlets like Koswe, and they stopped for some time. And after some time again, we saw them begin again. So, meaning that at any given time, they had control over who said what they said, the insults that were propagated against the widow, the insults that were propagated against the family. All those are there for public record. And the persons that were saying this were aligned to the government, or indeed in the government, as we saw in one incident where one member was suspended. We saw all that. But at this particular point, we're saying we have appointed mediators. There's a mediator appointed by the government. There's a mediator appointed by the family. And these two are to sit down and help the family and the government come to a resolution that both will agree amounts to a dignified send-off. And I did indicate that perhaps what has been at play here is not an issue of what is in the public interest, but possibly an issue of egos. And this is very simple. In my view, it is something that can be concluded even in a day, even in a few minutes, if only people are willing to give up their pride and do what is right by the family. And that will in turn be what is right for the public of Zambia. That is what I have to say as regards that. Yeah.
You had indicated earlier that, for example, you found out that the people that were protesting had obtained a permit in the name of the Republic of Zambia, the so-called progressive forces.
Yes, the progressive forces.
Just speak briefly to that before we...
Okay. So the progressive forces is this NGO that the government of the Republic of Zambia found friendly to use here in South Africa. And the idea was to give an impression that there was a public outcry that President Edgar Chagwa be buried in Zambia. I must state that right from the start, the idea of the family was that President Edgar Chagwa Lungu should be buried in Zambia. Until after that botched agreement that was there, when the president went on the screen and said, we cannot go on mourning in perpetuity, this must come to an end, we must return to normalcy, and he said all that he said. So the family said, okay, the government seems to want to have nothing to do with this, and to go and force things in Zambia would not amount to a dignified send-off. So we will have a private one. On the day of burial, you saw how that the government swiftly moved in and said, no, it's in the public interest. We'll bring back the national mourning and all those issues that followed thereafter. But through all this, I think the family has chosen to deal with this matter in a very sober way, whereas the government chose to go in a very combative way, engage progressive forces movement, such that even when they went to court, they needed that aspect to say there's a public outcry. How do they engineer that? There was no Zambian here who was going to go and picket for and on behalf of the government, because they knew exactly what was going on. So they had to get this South African movement paid for them to have a conference at Gallagher Center, where, well, at some venue, you may have seen it, where some people purporting to be representing this particular movement spoke out, talking about the desirability to bury this particular foreigner in their country, otherwise the land would be cursed. There was all that talk that was there. This very organization picketed at the Pretoria court, having gotten a permit right there in Pretoria, facilitated by the Zambian government and in the name of the Zambian government for purposes of picketing at the courts. We saw all that happen, but the family chose to be quiet about it and concentrate on what was important, what would amount to a dignified send-off. And that is the same organization that the government is using yet again. You may have noted that on the 23rd, this private investigator engaged by the government goes to the morgue, purports that he, together with the police that were accompanying this private investigator, purports that there was a report by a family member that President Chagwa Lungu had been poisoned. On that particular day, the family was contacted. We spoke to the people at the morgue. Was the police and the investigator were present. We said that there's no one from the family that has reported anything of that sort. We have been here the last 4 months. There hasn't been anything of that sort. And we know the circumstances. And these circumstances were made available to the government. All the documentation that related to the death of President Lungu was made available to the government. Thereafter, they refused to speak to the family. They said, we are going to have a meeting with the management of the morgue. They went to the headquarters. The minutes were published, and we did indicate in those minutes who was in attendance, the role that they played, and how that the private investigator said they had been engaged by the government of the Republic of Zambia. We also indicated that we engaged the Secretary to the Cabinet as regards that particular issue. At first declined that government had no role whatsoever, and we pushed to say, okay, if government had no role whatsoever, give us something in writing to give to the morgue. So that whoever comes, we tell them, there's no one that has reported this matter. There's actually no docket of case whatsoever. That's on the 23rd, when things happened, that's the 23rd of September rather. And they said they were going to return. The time they were having the meeting with the management of the morgue, they said, this person, we have gotten reports from social media that there are allegations of him having been poisoned. Now we change from a family member, moves to social media. At that particular time, we're not aware of any reports. On the 29th of September, we see this organization that protested at the Pretoria court come back now and hand in a report to the police to say, we suspect that this person was poisoned, and the allegations that he was poisoned, and we want to clear the name of South Africa. That is what was, but there's no complaint for and on behalf of the government of South Africa. there hasn't been any complaint whatsoever. So we see that all these moves being orchestrated by the government were intended to frustrate this particular process. We can only speculate as to what the benefit is, but it all goes down to erode the trust that the family was hoping to build in the government. So that is that. I wouldn't want us to spend so much time on this particular issue. Safe to say that we need to be humane in our approach to things now that we are commemorating our independence. We need to reflect on why we got this independence, how we ought to treat each other, what is Ubuntu in this particular context as we deal with each other in government, whether one is holding a position or is not holding a position. The rich and the poor, how we treat each other is very important. Ambassador, I would spend a whole lot of time discussing this matter, but
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
the public
Thank you,
has
Honorable
been
Makebi Zulu.
up to speed on what's happening. Yeah.
Today we'll not dwell much because want to reflect on Zambia. But one of the key issues your political opponents, the political opponents of the PF, have accused the PF and sometimes even to you, the spokesperson, is that we are using this matter for politics. What do you say to that before we move on to the reason we are here?
Who took the matter to court? That's the issue. If the family had not been taken to court, we wouldn't be where we are. So what politics are being played? The facts leading to the impasse were known. The mistrust that was built is known. The ones that are on the wrong side are known. It has never been the family. It is not the family. It will never be the family. Let us, in the same manner that the president said, let's pray for the family, I would say, let's pray for the government, for reason to prevail over ego. And we will resolve this matter in the nick of time.